Bible study. Today we will have a First and Second Kings, and as you might know, it's a one book. It is basically the book of Kings, and it has two parts, first and a second. And the reason for that, we've talked about this, is very simple. It's very hard to produce that long scroll, okay? So because of the material that they used for creation of books, it had to be brought in, it had to be delivered in two pieces. So part one and part two. Okay? In the book of Kings, we have actually one overarching story, but then there is the first block, the first part is kind of story in itself. The chapters 1 through 11 are concerned with the reign of King Solomon. Okay? And when you hear Solomon, what kind of things you are thinking about?
He built the big temple.
He built the temple. That's perfect. There is one more thing usually that people think when they hear Solomon.
He's so wise.
Wise, exactly. Okay, so that's the stories that we find in the First Kings in chapter 3, and then the beginning of the construction of the temple. The chapters begins at chapter 6, and then 7, and then it's completed. And then in chapter 8, we have temple built and dedicated. Okay, and if you will flip your page at the very bottom of the second page, you will see the memory verse. And I took memory verse from that prayer of dedication. It is important to understand and know how people thought and how they perceived the temple, that if you kind of look toward, even from a far distant land, if you direct your attention toward the place, then God, please hear the ones who will raise their prayers to you. Who remembers at least one guy that we have in the Bible that was far, far away from Jerusalem, and he prayed toward Jerusalem, and his prayer was answered? What's the name of the guy? Daniel. Okay, good. Yes. So the book of Daniel makes a very specific note that his window was open toward Jerusalem. So think about that. That means that whoever wrote Daniel, is it Daniel himself or one of his disciples, doesn't really matter at this point. And Daniel leaves, it's chapter 6 in Daniel, so it's a Persian kingdom, so it's about 520th, 516th, 515th year before Christ. And the temple is built roughly in 1000. So 500 years later, it still works. And it is important for our life. Okay? Of course, where 2 or 3 are gathered together, God hears us. No questions asked. But it is very important to come to the church. That's why we have dedicated buildings. That's why we have dedicated structures. That's why it is very important to maintain the theology of sacred space. Of course, when you have no choice, when you do not have anything, you can worship in garage. And people did it. In the history of the Soviet Union, when faithful ones gathered together, they would gather for birthday parties. Okay? And still held the worship service in the living room. Or they would commemorate the relatives, the faithful ones that passed away before them, and would gather on the cemeteries and held worship services there. Yes, when you have no choice, that's the way you do it. But when you have a choice and you have dedicated place, and this dedicated place is ornamented and decorated the particular way, that is important. That it is built on the theology of the temple that we find here. And this theology of the temple, as Trudy pointed out, is important to see as a continuation. Solomon builds great temple. Where did Israelites used to worship before? They used to worship in the tabernacle. Okay? So temple is the glorified tabernacle. Why? Okay? At least in two ways. Thing number one. Okay? First of all, everything is bigger in size. Okay? That's the plan of the tabernacle that you might find if you read carefully Exodus 25 through 31. Okay? If you read it, you'll find out that we have a courtyard, and it's placed that the north is here, south, west, and east. So whenever we move eastward in the Bible, it's not a good move. If you move in the Bible eastward, you are moving from God. If you don't believe me, go to Genesis 3. Then go to Genesis 4, and so on and so forth. So Adam and Eve were moved eastward from the garden. When they were moved from the garden, did they come closer to God or further from God? Further. Okay, so if you move eastward, Cain kills his brother and goes eastward. Okay, so in the Bible, again, we are moving eastward. Of course, God is omnipresent, not a question. But again, when you read the Bible and when you see some things, okay, you need to notice that. For example, Zechariah, father of John the Baptizer, sees an angel on the right side of the altar of incense. When he sees it on the north side, and he is terrified. Why? Because he sees an angel? Okay. The angels are not really regular creatures that you see every day. The problem is not with an angel, the problem is with the side. Okay? Because you pour the signs of judgment, the wine that was produced for usage in the tabernacle, not for drinking, but for pouring. You pour it on the north side, and that's a sign of judgment. So when he sees an angel on the north side, it's like, okay, is that my last day? And that's why angel calms him down and says, don't worry. It's all cool. We'll be fine. How do we know it? We know it from here, from Exodus. We know it from Kings. We know it from other places, from Jeremiah, when we see the wind coming from the, and so on and so forth. So, but that's kind of directional thing. Why we know that everything is bigger? Okay, in tabernacle, I need a marker. Let's say light blue. For example, just give you one example, and then you read it, and then when you will have a test next time, you'll pass it, okay? See how good for you guys that you moved? You don't have tests. You get everything by grace, unlike those guys, But seriously speaking, okay? If we study the tabernacle, the measurement, really? Wow.
It's alive.
Yeah. When you study the measurements for, let's say, holy place or Holy of Holies, the Holy of Holies is, it doesn't look like true. It's supposed to be a square, okay? So this veil should be a little bit here. It's 10 cubits by 10 cubits. And what's a cubit? That's this measurement, okay? Okay? It doesn't matter how many inches. Don't worry about that. Just think it's 1 unit, okay? 1 unit. So 10 of these, and it is also 10 cubits high. Okay? When we come to the temple, so that's the tabernacle. When we come to temple, the temple is, the Holy of Holies is 20 by 20 by 20. Now, let's see who is good with math.
Twice as big.
One more time. How many times the Holy of Holies in the temple is bigger than the tabernacle? One answer is twice. Is there any other answer?
8 times.
8 times bigger. Okay? Because if you multiply 20 by 20 by 20, what you will end up is 8,000. Okay? So you have 1,000 here, 1,000 cubits, and then you have 8,000. So it goes from 1 into 8. What? Okay? What is 8 in the Bible? Most of the time, or let me reverse it. I've never seen that 8 would represent anything but 7 plus 1. Okay? I've never seen that 8 would represent 6 plus 2, 4 plus 4, something like that. It is most always, especially with the dates and measurements, it is 7 days and the new one. Okay? Therefore, 8 is a new beginning. Okay? So we have a new beginning, new type of beginning for the worship. It does not mean that we get rid of the old system, but we build upon the old system and glorify it, not even improve it. It's not an improved because nothing was wrong with the previous one. We glorify it. We make it more glorious. Okay? Therefore, when we come to the New Testament and we see that Jesus' presence replaces the presence of God in the tabernacle and in the temple, we need to understand this temple theology. Okay? And we cannot understand this temple theology unless we study Exodus and, in this particular case, the book of Kings. Okay? That's about Solomonic time. There is one more thing that differs between temple and the tabernacle, just to finish up. The second one is not only the measurement, we have something changed. We have some furniture changed. For example, when you come into the temple, the very first thing you see is an altar. And then you have a laver of cleansing. So we have somewhat large basin of water to do the ritual washings. Okay? But when you come to the temple, you see, let me move it a little bit. You see the altar, okay? And then you have, I know it's dotted, but it's 10 chariots of water, okay? 5 in 2 lines, 5 on one line and 5 in another line. So you have basins of water looking like this with wheels. They are not movable, but they represent the idea of movement. So in the tabernacle, our water is still. It's like a lake or a pond. Okay? Beginning with temple, we kind of are introduced into idea of the water movement. This water moves from the it's bronze ocean now called, so the size of this laver of cleansing is bigger. So it moves from here to here. From the ocean, it moves from the sacred source, it moves toward the altar. Now, when we come to the book of Ezekiel, that we are going to study in a couple of weeks, and I will give you a small introduction. Why are we doing this messy order of books? Just bear with me. When we will come to the book of Ezekiel, we will see that at the very end, in chapters 40 to 48, when we have a description of new, greater temple, we see the river that flows from the temple to the end of the land. So it goes out of the temple area and it goes to the end of the land. Okay? And when we come to the book of Revelation, what do we see? We see the river that comes from the sacred place, goes through the temple, goes through the land, and to the ends of the earth. Okay? Again, to understand the symbolism that we have in Revelation, we need to know the tabernacle, the temple, and all of its symbolism. If you do not understand the temple, I have recently talked with one of our members. Oh, I want to study, Revelation. Cool. First, let's spend a couple years in those chapters. No, it's simple. No, it's not. Just trust me. If you do not understand the temple, the only way you will understand Revelation is this way. You read the Revelation, you close your eyes, you remember Terminator, Mars Attacks, all of those movies, and that's what it is. Okay? No, it's not what it is. John was a priestly guy. He was born in priestly family. He was raised as a priest. The only things he really knows and thinks about are priestly or temple type categories. He thinks in the sense of the temple calendar. He thinks in the sense of God's temple presence. And he thinks in the sense of God's community that is built around his presence. God's presence. Okay? So that's why it is important to read those first 11 chapters. There is one more thing about Solomon and we'll be done with it. Okay? With Solomon. What is the main problem of Solomon? You can tell me. Why do we have judgment against Solomon at the very end of his story? Women, yes. Okay?
He's full of himself.
He had 999 too many women in his life. You look puzzled, right? Okay, so if you open up chapter 11 of 1 Kings, okay? Let's go there. Now, okay, verse 1. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with daughter of Pharaoh, okay? So we have a mention of the daughter of Pharaoh. But apart from this first and the only proper wife, he loved many other Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, Hittite women. From the nations concerning which God had blah, 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 say so, do not bring them. And altogether, verse 3, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Now think about that.
He's busy.
Yeah, right? If you stay close enough with each woman one day a year, you probably can visit them every 3 years. Okay? What kind of relationship is that?
Tacky.
It's called messed up. You know, it's called, what kind of families? Dysfunctional. Cannot remember that word. I'm sorry. It's probably because I have a great family. Thank you. My wonderful wife, she does a great job to have our family somewhat normal. Apart from me. But seriously speaking, 700 plus 300 minus wife, which is daughter of Pharaoh, 999 too many. Okay? And people point to that and say, see, that's the problem. Yeah, but the problems begin before. Again, if you want to go back a little bit, the first problem signal is in chapter 10. So 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. What's there? What's there?
Gold.
Yeah. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year, it's not an exceptional year. Means on a annual basis, he would collect how much gold?
A lot.
No, not a lot. There is a number there. If Bible wanted to say a lot, Bible would say a lot.
66 talents.
666. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Talent is a weight. Let's put it this way. He would have a couple, Benny's not here, I'm kind of surprised. So he would have a couple trains of gold. Every year. I mean, guys, think about that. He has a territory compared to the state, the glorious, very huge state of New Hampshire. Okay? And he would collect on annual basis this much money. So when we come to Revelation chapter 13 and see the same number, the number is not pointing to a Gentile. It doesn't point to Nero. It doesn't point to anybody else outside of Israel. It's the Israelite leader who begins his decline. Why? Because we have 1 Kings 10:14, then we have 1 Kings 10, 26, see what's there. We have horsemen, and we have horses and chariots. Okay? And then we have 11:1. And we think, what's the problem with horses? They're beautiful. They're wonderful.
Big
And we have Derby and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, right. That's what we have now. Back then, the only reason you will have a horse is if you want to attack. That's your tank. Okay? Nothing else. If you have a chariot, that's like your real, Humvee with, 12 soldiers inside. Not kidding. You are not going to plow on a horse, and you are not going to ride just for fanciness on a horse. If you want to show yourself as a leader, and somewhat peaceful leader, what are you going to use?
Chariot.
No. Peaceful leader, mule or a donkey. That's why Jesus enters Jerusalem as a king, but a peaceful king.
On a donkey.
On a donkey. That Jesus entering Jerusalem as a king on a donkey does not mean that he took the most beat up Ford, which you have to fix or repair daily, instead of fancy schmancy, some kind of Lamborghini car or Rolls Royce. No, that's a wrong comparison. He entered on Rolls Royce instead of Sherman tank. Okay? That's the comparison. He's still noble. He is the king. He is the leader. He is the guy who can lead the people, but he wants to lead people in a peaceful way. The problem is, when we begin with this one, we lose those two, and we do not see the whole picture. You need to compare those three things. Why do we know that they are problematic? Because in the previous chapters and in the previous books, in book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 17, verses 14 to 17, we have three main rules of what king should not ever do. Too much money. Do not buy horses. Why? Because Israel should not be an aggressive state. They should win other nations by evangelism, not by force. Okay? And of course, too many wives that let his heart. The problem is not even with number, honestly. Yeah, it's kind of problematic. But the problem with Solomon was not the number itself. The problem is that foreign women led his heart to worship foreign gods. Okay? So you can have one wife. But if she's not a believer, most likely you'll end up like Solomon. Bet. And in our church we have many, quite a number of actually guys who came to church because their wives were faithful ones. They would worship the God. If you want to be with me, sorry man, you're stuck. You need to be a Lutheran. Okay, cool. So, that's important. So when we see the book of Kings, we can read books separately, but we also need to read them in the consequence, okay? In the order of how they are plugged into the Bible. And we'll come back to that, I promised. Okay? Now, the other kind of second largest story, which includes the story of the Solomon. Look at our structure. What we have is what I told you, this very fancy scholarly word, chiastic structure. Okay? Everybody knows how to spell it?
No.
No. Okay, cool. Okay? When you have a sentence, I don't know, cannot come up with in my mind right now. When you have a sentence that there is a first thought and the second thought, And then the next sentence begins with something that resembles the second one, and it ends with something that the first sentence began. When you connect relevant points, you will end up with the Greek letter key. Okay? That's why we have Jesus. What's the title? Christ. Okay? That's why, because he was, his name, oops, sorry. Got my Greek. Okay? Christos. Okay? So that's letter key. So when you connect, so that's why when we have the passage that kind of connects the ends and the parts that go toward the center, and then in the center you have what is called pivotal point. Sometimes it is one, sometimes they can be parallel. Okay? That's the structure of our text. We see the Solomonic kingdom built and Solomon temple erected, and then at the very end we see how Solomon dynasty falls, the temple is destroyed. Okay? A and A prime, sorry. Then B, what we have in the B? Rise of the northern kingdom, and then in B prime we have a fall of the northern kingdom. Okay, that's what it matches. Then C, we have prophet Elijah, and then we have a prophet Elisha, his disciple. And in the middle, we see a particular story from prophet Elisha of his miracles and his kindness that begins kind of with the turn of that turns the development of the northern kingdom. Okay? So when we see the structure, through this structure, we also see the faithfulness of God. Very often in the book, we have a phrase, according, as it happened according to the word of the Lord. So God promised something, and it was fulfilled. Okay, we have it within the book, and we have it outside of the book, as I told you. Because God said, if your king will do those three stupid things, too much gold, too many women, and he's going to be, his ideas would be to spread his military alliances outside, not to defend his country. That's the problem with not defending. The Israelite kings were allowed to build fortresses to defend the country, but connections should be made based on the outreach, good news, evangelism, to make financial or economical connections between the country and win them over by projecting the grace of God into them. But if you have too many arms and tanks and all of that, you kind of begin to trust in them. Yes?
The Old Testament or the chiastic structure predates the Greek language and symbol. Is the symbol derived from something in the Old Testament or the Hebrew language?
Sorry, I didn't understand at all.
The Greek language and the symbol chi,
Okay.
I'm saying the structure existed before.
Yeah, structure existed before, but modern scholars.
So is it a coincidence or does it derive from something earlier?
No, it's just, okay. As you all know, that before Isaac Newton, people had no problem with harvesting apples because there was no law of gravity, right? Okay? My answer is, what is the starting point? The law of gravity or the fact that Isaac Newton was able to define it? When people defined that structure, they came up, since most of them have more classical, therefore kind of Greekish education. That's a term from literary structure, from literal analysis, not necessarily from biblical analysis. So the people who studied literature as a whole, not only biblical literature, found that, and since for them it made more sense to make that title according to the Greek letter, they did it. Okay? but the structure exists in the text before. So that's just, it's when we discover the law, doesn't mean that it wasn't there before. I'm not sure that they, gave a name. It was very natural for them to think that way. Why? Because the life is that way. You wake up, you brush your teeth, you go to work, you have lunch, you finish your work, you have your dinner, you brush your teeth, and you go to sleep. I'm not kidding. I mean, your day is roughly chiastic. But this A is not this A. It's a new A. It's a development on what was before. Okay? So that's the thing. So that's why we have, in the book of Kings, we see few important things. One of them is the sacred presence of God, the faithfulness of God, and also an importance of God marriages. And I told you about Solomon, but we also have another guy who was not the best, was the tomato in the box. He was not the sharpest, pencil in the box, definitely. But his spiritual skills and abilities were negatively influenced and improved by his wife. Okay, and I'm talking about Ahab and his wonderful wife, and her name was Jezebel. Okay, so every one of you know this great lady. Seriously. Who tries to negotiate with Elijah? Ahab. Who says, I'm going to kill you, Elijah? Jezebel. So and that's an important thing is, in the book of Kings, if the king is not faithful, God will provide either wife or advisors that they would swing the pendulum all the way to the other extreme. Okay? It is an idea that it is king, the leader, who should be faithful. And then, one way or another, the group of faithful people will be gathered around him. He is the one who is responsible for the temple, for the worship, for the production or reproduction of the scrolls of 5 books of Moses and the prophets, and so on and so forth. If not, somebody else will come and make sure he would be really led astray. Okay? And that's what we have in the book. And that's important to notice. Now, we have few interesting things. For example, apart from what I already said, the figures of Elijah and Elisha. Okay? When we read New Testament, who is Elijah is compared to?
Moses.
Okay, if we go here, then Moses. If we go previous. But if we go into New Testament, this is John the baptizer. Honestly, I'm purposefully saying that I don't say John the Baptist. Why? Because he was not the Baptist. Really, he did not give his heart to Jesus when he was like 30 years old. Trust me. Why? How do we know that? Because in the Gospel of Luke, he jumps he jumps in the womb of his mother when Mary with her baby approaches her cousin. Okay? So that means he gave his heart to Jesus even before he was born. So he's not a Baptist, he's a baptizer. He was the one who did the baptism of Jesus. And there is a reason for 30 years, I'm not going to go there right now. But if Elijah is John the Baptizer, therefore, Elisha is a prefigure, thank you, for whom?
Christ.
For Jesus, okay? Okay? So when we see that in the middle of the book, we have mercies and miracles that Elisha does to the nation, it's very interesting to see and compare what Jesus does. And many of those miracles will not be the same, but very much in parallel to each other. Okay? Now, at the very end, I want to say, just basically say what I've wrote here. At the second paragraph of the relevancy of the book. The Book of Kings can be called a story with glorious beginning, gloomy narrative, and comforting conclusion. We see the temple project completed, and that's the glorious beginning. But we also see the failing of the north and then south kingdoms. Yet, I should have put yet, but the book as a whole ends up on the promising note of hope for the restoration of the king Jehoiachin when he is released from the Babylonian prison. So let's go to the second book of Kings, chapter, I think 25. Yeah, we have very sad stories how Zedekiah ruled, Jerusalem is captured, then Judah is brought into captivity, Nebuchadnezzar comes, and remember, okay, again, it is very important to study this particular book so you will understand that Nebuchadnezzar is not a bad guy. Nebuchadnezzar is a good guy, even though he destroys the temple. He destroys the temple for one simple reason. That's why the theme of the temple is so, you cannot overestimate how important is that. They turned the temple of Solomon into an idol. Okay? And we'll know it when we'll go to Ezekiel. I'll show you right there. Because for a period of time, Jeremiah, Daniel, and Ezekiel, and whoever wrote the Kings, they were like the author of the Kings. They were contemporaries, so they would live together. Not same place, but same time. So the point is, we see all of that destruction, and temple falls, and we know that Jeremiah is taken into captivity, but different ones. He is not led into Babylon, he goes into Egypt. But the book ends, let's go to the very, very end. Verse 27 of chapter 25. 2 Kings. So 2 Kings 25. From 27 to the end. And in the 37th year of exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month. So, 12th month, 27 days. Almost at the very end of the year. So if the year ends, what the year begins with? The Passover. Okay? So right before he would mentally, should have been prepared to celebrate Passover, he is released. So evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year when he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So that's a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar. And apparently, his father, Nebuchadnezzar, captured many kings. So he had them kind of like he would have a fellowship hall where he would eat on a regular basis. And he would have, of course, his throne and his table, and he would eat, whatever was given to him, his proper kingly food. But other guys who were captured but not kept as prisoners in the sense of in chains, okay? They would be invited and they would be, kind of be in his presence. But the thing is, he even made his chair somewhat higher, elevated compared to other guys. That's a really great sign of grace. So Jehoiachin puts off his prison garments. He was really in prison. And every day of his life, he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance, was given him by the king, according to his daily needs as long as he lived. So what we have is in some sense, we begin, gloriously with this wonderful temple, glorious construction. And then slowly but surely we go down, but at the very end we have a sign of resurrection. Okay? So we see how Kings gets off the prison, but since this is not the last book in the Bible, we need to expect something more, and we'll go more and more until Jesus comes, because this narrative for the Revelation is relatively the same, but the thing is, but the end is much higher and more glorious in the book of Revelation than the beginning. Okay? We begin when John is where? On the island, Patmos, being exiled there, basically being in prison. So it's kind of, it's not reversed, but we need to understand that the Revelation begins at the, let me redo this picture. So what we have is we begin at the lower point with Revelation, but we end with glorious end. Okay, so it's kind of like this, but reversed. Okay? Questions or comments?